Thanks again, everybody, for taking some time today. I know everybody's got a lot going on. Everybody's spending a lot of time on their Zoom calls these days, and so it means a lot to me and to the team here at Sparkbox that you were willing to take a few minutes out of the day and spend it with us. I'm excited to sort of give you all just a quick overview of some of the things we've been learning about design systems over the last 4 years and really a lot this year. So I want to jump into that. Before we do, just a little bit of housekeeping, just to kind of keep us all on the same page. My name is Ben. I'm the president of a company called Sparkbox. There's about 52 of us spread all over the United States, and we're really on a mission to make the web a little bit better each day. That's kind of what we spend our days doing. We're going to talk a lot about design systems today, but if there's anything that we don't cover, we've got space for Q&A and all that, but if we don't get to the thing that you're thinking about, I just want you to know that's my email address, ben@heysparkbox.com. My whole job here is just to connect with people and try to understand what are you working on, what are you struggling with, what are you learning, and look for opportunities for us to sort of play our role. I've always thought about, there's always somebody who's a little smarter than you. There's always somebody who's a little further behind. And one of the things that we talk about here is that we have to play our role, right? We have to learn from some folks who are blazing the trail, and we have to be willing to share the things that we're learning too. So that's kind of what today is about for us. Again, my email, if you have anything you want to talk about, please don't hesitate. I love to chat with folks about this stuff. I'm also on Twitter, a lot less than I used to be these days, but you can hit me there. My DMs are open if you want to chat, if that's a more comfortable medium for you. I'll just give you a quick overview of the day. We have about 45 minutes to an hour or so of content that I'm going to share with you. That's going to be a pretty high level overview of a maturity model we've been working on for design systems. We'll talk a lot more about that. But I do want you to know we've got plenty of time saved at the end to dig into any questions or comments that you have. So there's a couple ways for you to participate today. If you have very specific questions, Zoom's Q&A feature is right there, available for you to use. So don't hesitate to put a question in there. We will take a peek at those throughout our time together. We've got folks from Sparkbox on the webinar today, on Zoom with you today, just kind of taking a look and making sure that I'll be aware of those questions as they come up. We have time reserved at the end, a good amount of time, probably about a half an hour or so that we've saved just to make sure we get through as much of that as we can. Of course, also if you have, if there are resources you want to share or things that I say that sort of resonate with you and you want to make a comment of some kind, the Zoom chat is also open, so feel free to do that. You can chat to all of the other attendees. We tried to kind of keep this like a small, intimate group, so take some time to introduce yourself, get to know some of the folks that are here with you. And I'll also say if you're having any technical problems at all, you can use that chat to the panelists. We have a couple folks signed in as panelists who can answer questions for you in that way, or this email address that's on screen right now, events@heysparkbox.com. We'll be monitoring that throughout as well. So feel free to pop into there, send an email if that's more comfortable, or if you're having trouble with chat or something. With all of this open, right, with our chat open and Q&A and all that, I just want you all to be very cognizant of sort of being very respectful in the way that we communicate. That's sort of just something that we kind of expect at all of our events, but I do want to make sure we're clear about that. If you have any issues at all, if you feel like there's anything happening that's inappropriate, I just want you to feel like you can reach out to that events or chat with any of the panelists there. We'll make sure we address any concerns that you have, but let's just try to be respectful with each other, and I think that's a good tone, try to be kind and respectful for the day. So with all of that out of the way, now we can kind of jump into the reason that we're all here. And I thought it might be helpful to just start with a little context for you. So about 7 years ago now, Sparkbox was hired by a really big retailer, somebody that you would know. And we were hired at that time to help with a responsive redesign of their product detail page. So that gives you a sense for how long ago this was, right? This was the page, though, that they used to sell literally every single product they offered across multiple brands. We're talking about billions of dollars, US dollars, that were being spent by consumers to buy their products through this single template. So the responsibility that we felt taking that work was heavy, and we partnered with their UX and design team and their technical teams to really kind of come in and like put a strategy in place for how we would approach this work. So we buckled up, and we spent a year on this single page, really kind of refining and working really closely with their teams, designing, building, testing, iterating. And in the midst of that work, I think maybe 3/4 of the way through, we kind of looked up from the work and realized that we had almost unintentionally created what really was the beginnings of a nice system for them. We had done the work to think about the experience and to build that experience in a good way, but we also had done the work to kind of deconstruct that experience into components and patterns that we could reuse. And so I think, we went to at that point, we went to the collaborators we had inside the org, and we just said, hey, we had talked a little bit about this sort of more modular way to work early on, and it's definitely something that we're seeing in the work as we make progress. We could take this and turn it into a design system, and this might serve your organization and all of these brands and all the other experiences in your e-commerce that you want to also evolve and reimagine. It could serve all of those things well. So we did that. They were totally on board, and it was an exciting time. So we kind of jumped in with them and started that work. It was about a year after that that I got a call from our director of operations at the time, and they were a little bit worried because that very client had reached back out to us and said, hey, all of our design system work has been put on hold. And that was kind of like the moment for me where I realized, we were like off and running on this big design system project with a huge customer, a large portion of our revenue, to be very honest. And I think it was scary for me to realize that I didn't know a lot about why they were thinking systematically, or, I guess I just felt like there was a lot of unknown around design systems at the time. And this was, early in design system history, at least this phase of the design system history. And so that instance was really what kind of started us at Sparkbox down a path of research and trying to better understand design systems. And so for the last 4 years, we've been super intentional about that. We have, hopefully some of you have even participated in our design system survey. If you have, thank you so much. A lot of what we're going to share today comes from the things that you all have shared with us and be willing to kind of take some time and share. So I am grateful to the industry who's been willing to kind of share the things they're learning, share the things they're struggling with through these surveys. They've been really insightful for us. But in addition to the surveys, as a part of preparing for that survey each year, I have the privilege of spending a good portion of my time before we re-release that survey of just reaching out to folks in the industry who are doing this work. Mostly they're internal on larger design teams, on design system teams. And I'm just asking them a lot of questions about what's changed over the course of the last 12 months or so. And so I do that because I want to make sure that each time we do a survey, we're evolving that a little bit, because the industry and the context is changing. You know that. So I want us to make sure that the questions we're asking are staying relevant. And so I do that. And this year in particular, I stumbled on some really interesting patterns that have kind of led us to this maturity model. But we've been doing this kind of work and research for a while now. And I'll share the link to this survey if you haven't had a chance to look at that data towards the end. But this has really informed a lot of our thinking. In addition to the research, of course, we do a lot of this work, with lots of big companies. Have been doing that for years now. And so all the things that I'll share with you today kind of come from the research, but also from the work, and then also just sort of like merging those two things and just doing a lot of thinking about how could we do this better. So that's kind of context and maybe the groundwork for what we'll talk about today. I also just, every time I talk about systems, I'm amazed at how many sort of different ideas there are out there about design systems and what they are. And so I think it's wise for us still, even now, to spend just a moment being a little bit clear about what we mean when we say design systems. And I've read and researched and tried to find as many of these good definitions for design system as I can. And here's one that I actually really like from Sean Rhodes and Albert Dang. I'm just going to read this to you and then we'll talk through real quick. It says, a design system is a living ecosystem of assets, tools, people, and processes that work together to create harmony across products and platforms, raise confidence and familiarity with users, and save time and money for your organization. I like that because it's bringing together all of the different pieces and parts that are necessary to have a system that's actually helpful and that lives up to the kind of value we think is possible with this work. I think it's really critical to say this, that design systems are bigger than any specific tool, right? They are decidedly not a Figma library. They are not a set of React components, right? Those are very specific views of a system. And I think those things are necessary for the work. But the system itself, I like to say that it has to live or exist independent of the tooling that we use to express it. And that's pretty idealistic and theoretical. But the reason I think that's important for us to say is that the tools are going to change, right? They always do. They always have. They always will. But the things that we believe about how we design, why we design, how we build products in a collaborative way, those are the things that have to be lasting. And that's, I think, the power of a system. When a design system is done right, it becomes a shared language for your internal teams. It enables massive scale, beautiful efficiency, of course. And it makes all of that possible, while creating consistent experiences for users, across lots of platforms and channels. Now, that is, of course, the answer that everybody sort of gives when you ask about systems. We talk about these ideals. But I think it's like this year especially, I've spent a lot of my time thinking about this stuff. And so I find myself in this sort of existential moment where I'm asking, why the heck am I spending so much of my time talking to all these people and thinking about this so deeply? And so I want to try to just express what I actually think is the value of a system. And I'm going to do that with just sort of a goofy little example. I'm going to show you a few things on your screen, okay? And I would like for you to just, in your mind, say what it is that you see. So I will show you an object and I just want you to say it in your head. Now, if you're at home by yourself, you can shout that out if you want, and that would be just fine with me. But we're on Zoom, so we're going to do the best we can here with this, all right? So here's our first one. What is this? Okay, and what is this? And what is this? Okay, now here's another set. What is this? And what is this? And if you will bear with me, tell me what should be on this screen. And you can just type that into chat. If anybody's willing there to type what should be on this screen. Yeah, there's a few folks. Thank you. A bed. That's right. Yeah, and it's interesting, one of the things that I love about humans is that we have this absolutely amazing ability to match patterns. This goofy little experiment was actually quite simple for you, right? You all recognized these objects, I'm sure, with no problem at all. Even if you've never seen a chair or a table or a bed that looked exactly or precisely like these ones that I showed you. And not only were you able to identify those individual items, but you saw the repeating pattern very quickly, right, of chair, table, bed. And what's really cool about this is that you could walk into a room full of thousands of unique tables and chairs, and if I just asked you to take a seat, you would know without even thinking that you could walk to one of those chairs, that you could slide it out from the table, and you could sit in it. And you would know exactly how much effort you needed to exert to pull that chair out. And you would know that the table itself is not going to fall over if you slide the chair out from under it. And you would trust that that chair is strong enough to hold you up when you actually put your weight on it. And all of that understanding is sort of encoded in just this little phrase, take a seat. And I like to think about like how much work it would actually be if we didn't have that ability, right? And if 100 of you walked into a room with all these unique tables and chairs, and I had to explain to each of you, this is actually a table that you can rest your computer on, and this is a chair, and we can pull this out, and the table will be fine, and you can trust that it will hold you. And all of that effort, right? We sort of don't have to go through that every day. And instead I can just say, take a seat. And I can trust that all of the data and experience with chairs of so many kinds is automatic for you. And that is kind of the power of language. And I think it's a power that we take for granted often. And I think what I love about design systems is that they give us this kind of power, this kind of jump start on the work. But they do that in the context of the experiences that we're hoping to create, the digital experiences. Now, if we take it just a little bit further, bear with me, and I say, can you codify that pattern of a chair? Can you write a set of rules by which any human can identify any chair? Right? On the surface, it seems easy, right? But if you start to dig in, that's actually a very difficult task to do, right? A chair has 4 legs, but so does a table. And not every chair has 4 legs, right? What about a small couch? Is that a chair? What about a seat in your car or maybe a baby seat? It's actually quite difficult to define those things in a way that is logical. But you, as a human, have the ability to do it without even thinking about it. And that codification is really the work of design systems. It's identifying the patterns in the experiences that we're designing and it's documenting them. And the power of design systems, I believe, is not actually in their efficiency. It's not in the reuse. It's not in the consistency. It's not in their ability to make our experiences more accessible. The power of a design system is that creating it forces us to define what we mean when we talk about the ideas that we're trying to produce. I think the power of design systems is that they actually unify our teams around a shared understanding, a common language for the work we aspire to, and this makes our work better. I hear sometimes that people worry about how design systems will limit their creativity, and that drives me crazy because I just don't believe it's true. Design systems don't limit creativity any more than the English language limits poetry. In fact, the languages we speak enable unlimited creativity, and so can our design systems. And this is why I get excited about it. This is why I think there's a lot of work to do and a lot of digging in that we can actually do. And we're really not seeing the value yet that I think a true, healthy, mature design system can offer us. And so that's what I hope to sort of like share with you today. Thank you for indulging me in that little experiment. So the core content that I want to share here is about this maturity model. And I shared this is based on the research and the work over the last 4 years and more in terms of the work. But I do want to say too that in thinking this through, we've kind of looked into a lot of maturity models, not just for design systems, but for lots of things. There are many of them out there, and tried to understand, of course, what's already been published around systems, but also just like how are these things done? How do you build a maturity model? And I wanted to make sure I called out, this is a little different. It's intended to be very practical for you. A lot of these systems these maturity models are very theoretical and sort of heady, and we have to have some of that because it has to be generic enough to be applied across lots of systems. But there's a lot of very direct, practical advice, I think, that we can draw from this. So I'll make sure I pause to call those things out as well. And there's kind of like 4 main concepts that I want to share with you. The first of those is just the 4 stages of design system maturity. So from very beginning, before you have a system live, to a very sort of evolved and mature and sustainable system. We'll talk about those 4 stages. We're also going to talk about something we're calling origin stories. And this is really how the beginnings of your system have a huge impact on what your journey through those 4 stages will look like. So we're going to spend some time on that. We're also going to give 2 frameworks here. One is a framework for how to mature. This is where it gets very practical, how to move through those stages in a really healthy way. And the last main concept is we just call this system stability. It's a simple way to think about, once you have a system in place, how do you keep it stable? Because the forces around you, the industry, the people you have on your team, the ideas about your products, all of those things are going to be changing constantly. The tooling, we talked about that. The tooling is going to be changing, right? So how do we keep things stable? So with all of that context, I want to jump in and start with the 4 stages. Stage 1, we just call building version 1. And it's the very earliest stage of design system maturity. It's basically any activity that's leading up to and even including that first official release that you have of your system. Now, stage 1 can look wildly different based on a lot of factors. And I will say that the decisions you make in stage 1 can have a huge impact on how your system matures as well. At its core, this stage is really about discovering the right scope for your first version, and obviously finding partners throughout your organization and building so that you can understand what you need to build that will be valuable for those partners. Stage 2 we call growing adoption. And really, in all the conversations that I've had, almost every single person that I've talked to, once that first version is live, their focus shifts almost immediately to, will people use it? And I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, we spend a lot of time and effort building a thing, and the intent is that it's reusable and that folks will subscribe to it. So we want to see, will they? And I think stage 2, we can't just focus on getting folks to use it. Once people are using it, we're going to have to take their feedback and evolve it. So there's also some portion of this where we're focused on understanding how we support people through that adoption process, and then learn from them as they do put it into practice. Now, once you reach a critical mass of adoption here in stage 2, you're going to transition into stage 3, which we call surviving the teenage years. Now, with this comes a whole new set of challenges, right? You've got folks using the system in some way now, in some capacity. And so with more subscribers comes more bugs, comes more feature requests, comes all kinds of people doing things with the system you probably never intended them to do. And so you've got a lot of things happening, a lot of moving pieces and parts. And this is where your leadership is going to be saying, all right, show me that this thing is doing what you told me it would do back in stage 1. And so you have to kind of prove its value here, right? You've got to demonstrate very explicitly that you're willing to support the people using the system, or you'll be back in stage 2 trying to find users again pretty quickly. And you're going to have to figure out how to allow folks to contribute back into the system in some way. And of course, how to govern those submissions. So there's a lot that's happening in stage 3. And stage 4 we call evolving a healthy product. And this is really when your system has become a fully realized product and your focus shifts to sustainability, growth, and a highly evolved engagement with your subscribers. You're really going to start paying attention to the forces of change in the industry, your organization. You're going to focus on stabilizing that system, like as we kind of mentioned earlier. And you're going to know you're in stage 4 when lots of different disciplines across the organization will see the system as the way that you design and build products. Now, as I mentioned, the experience that you have, that every organization has moving through these stages, is wildly different. I initially, as we were working through this, I could not find a path through it that felt consistent. And I realized that the missing piece for me was that how the system got started, or what we call the origin story, dramatically impacts what these stages look like for you. So just a quick overview of what I mean when we say origin stories. There's kind of 2 primary origin stories. The first is top-down. And a top-down origin story simply means that the very first release of your design system is driven by executive leadership. So you might think of it as the leadership being involved, aware, and actively supportive of that first release. Now, the opposite end of that is the other type of origin story, which is a grassroots. And that means the first version of the design system is initiated and led typically by folks who needed it. In other words, individual contributors, the folks who design and build products on a daily basis. So you might say that your executive leadership was uninvolved, unaware, or unsupportive of that first release. It's definitely easiest to think about these two origin stories by thinking about your leadership's involvement. And that's really what makes an impact through those stages of maturity. So let's talk quickly about the differences between these two origin stories. There's a lot actually, but the first one is pretty obvious, this idea of visibility, right? If you're in a top-down scenario where your leadership is active, driving this work, there's a lot of visibility, right? They're essentially, the feeling oftentimes is like that they're investing or they're betting a little bit on this idea, and they're going to want to see results, right? In a grassroots situation, a lot of times it's somebody who's just building a thing for themselves or for their team, and so there's a lot less visibility. Sometimes nobody even knows it's happening except a few folks. With leadership's buy-in comes oftentimes a budget of some kind, and on the opposite side of that, grassroots, many times there's no budget or it's a very informal, small amount of money that's been set aside. Oftentimes in a top-down situation, because leadership is supportive, there's a team of some kind that's been sanctioned. Now, many times at the beginning, it's a small portion of several folks' time. So it might be 25% of these 3 people they can spend on design system work. In grassroots, oftentimes it's folks working after hours or just as they design and build a feature, they try to, sort of break that down and add it to a library that they're maintaining, so their work for themselves can be a little faster, more efficient, more consistent, those kinds of things. And then, scope is an interesting one. In the top-down situation, a lot of times the leadership's investment is about seeing this being used across the organization. And so the scope tends to be very broad, whereas in a grassroots situation, it's an individual contributor or a small number of folks on one team. And many times they're very focused on their specific needs. So the scope is more narrow and the work sometimes can be a little deeper in that context. And then our last one here is just this idea of pressure, right? And I think this comes with all these others, with more visibility, with an actual budget and a team and a big scope. There's a lot of pressure in the top-down model. And early on in grassroots systems, it's oftentimes just, it's so informal that there's not a lot of pressure. It's just somebody trying to make things a little better. Now, if you're thinking about this concept, you're probably seeing that these things maybe apply to you, or some mix of them apply to you. And that's actually quite normal. And that's because these two ideas are actually two extreme ends of a spectrum, right? Most systems are going to mature with characteristics of both of these. But it helps to think about the origin stories, at least I've found it does, in this way. Because the origin story, as its name implies, is about how the initial version of the system came to be, the differences between a top-down stage 1 and a grassroots stage 1 are very noticeable, right? These are very different sites, different experiences, But as the system matures, the differences become more subtle. They become more like each other. So a stage 2 top-down system is going to be very similar or more similar to a grassroots stage 2. And of course, our end goal is to get really honest support from both your leadership and from all the individual contributors. And so the origin story of a stage 3 and a stage 4 system is, at times, maybe it's indistinguishable. So, visually, a top-down system is going to become more like a grassroots system as it matures. And the opposite is true, right? A grassroots system is going to become more like a top-down system as it matures. And remember, these are the extreme paths. So something like this path is a story that I often hear, right? And in this situation, the initial version of a system is very much grassroots. It's released without a lot of fanfare or awareness from leadership, oftentimes, or investment from leadership. But once leadership starts to see it and sees the potential power and value that it could have, they jump behind it, and maybe there's a large investment. And we move from grassroots to top down almost overnight in that situation. And now we've got support, we've got budget, we've got team, and we're moving towards stage 4 in sort of a different path than how we started. Okay, so we've got these 4 stages of a design system, and we've got this idea of an origin story. Let's talk a little bit more practically about how to actually move through these stages. It's actually kind of simple to break down into these 3 areas of focus. And what's interesting is that, of course, they all start with an E, which works out beautifully. We call them the 3 E's internally. But you have to always be doing all of these things. And so let me just walk through these very quickly. I think it's a little self-explanatory, but education, what we mean here is just spreading the word, right? This is casting the vision. This is explaining, especially in the context of your org, what a system is, why it's important. This is you out and about doing this work, right? Spreading the word. And this is typically a little bit one way. This is you communicating out. The second area of focus is engagement, and that's really about getting others involved in the work with you. So this could be you learning from folks, doing interviews. This could be them submitting bugs or issues or even pull requests or updates. This is a two-way interaction, right? So this is back and forth. This is them engaging with you to help move the system forward. And then evolution, of course, is making the system better. This is just like any other product, right? It's never actually done. And so you can't ever stop moving it forward or evolving it. And this is the same kind of approach of like highly iterative testing into decisions that we want to do with system work as we would with any other product. I'll say that one of the most common problems that we see in our client work, when we get involved with organizations that already have a system of some kind, is that their internal team has been oftentimes too focused on one or two of these areas, and they've left one or two out. So a lot of times our work is identifying those gaps and helping them sort of fill those in. Oftentimes it's evolution, right? People are so focused on like designing and building the actual system that they're not doing the work that's needed to like bring folks along. And so now I wish that it was as simple as do the education, do the engagement, do the evolution, but of course it's not, right? These aren't like a simple set of steps to follow. It's a little bit more iterative than that. It's cyclical. So you might think about it as a cycle that you've always got to be working on, right? You've always got to be doing some education, some engagement, some evolution. And after you do those things long enough, your system will have grown and matured into the next stage. So what's cool about this is that we can actually kind of layer this concept on top of the 4 stages themselves. And that gives us a nice framework for thinking about the work that we have before us. So I want to walk through each of these stages and talk about these areas of focus, but I want to make sure you hear that we call this an additive framework, right? So that means that in stage 1, there's a set of tasks you've got to do that are education focused, that are engagement focused, and that are evolution focused. And when you finally move into stage 2, you get that first version released, you can't really stop doing the education tasks from stage 1. Instead, you're going to keep doing those things, plus you're going to add in a new set of things that you have to do while you're in this stage 2 driving adoption area. So the work is just, it's constant, and it only gets more difficult, right? So, I mean, I'm not trying to discourage you all, but I want you to know that there's a lot to this, and by stage 4, you're doing all of these tasks from all 4 stages around education, evolution, and engagement, sort of in an unending way. So let's dive into each of the stages, and I want to talk to you about these 3 areas of focus for each stage, and this is where things get a little more practical. So in stage 1, building version 1, and this is not, I'll also say this is not all inclusive, right? There are so many things that I could list here under things, educational tasks that you probably need to be doing if you're in stage 1. But some of the core things are are these kinds of ideas, right? So defining a design systems, especially in the context of your organization. I cannot tell you how many folks have different ideas about what you mean when you say design system. Even now, years into people reading and writing and thinking about this and doing this work, people still are confused about it. And so taking the time to actually say what you mean, clarity here is huge. This is where you're going to be sharing, like, what does it cost to do this, right? Why are we choosing to do this? What are the benefits? Why does our organization need to do this work? This oftentimes is you in Keynote or PowerPoint or something, or Google Slides, like going around doing what I'm doing right now, right? Talking to people. And I know that many of you probably did not get into this business to be salespeople, but that is part of the job. And I'll share a resource with you a little later that will help maybe frame that up for you. But it's definitely part of the work that's necessary. Really here, you are a leader. You're casting the vision for what this can be and why it's needed work. In stage one, in terms of engagement, really it's about discovery. So, I think about this with our work at Sparkbox. With every new customer, every new engagement, we do discovery work, right? We get in and we try to ask a lot of questions and just get to know the people that we're going to be working with. And we just have to understand the context. That's the only way we can help them make good decisions. And the same thing is true for you in this work inside your organization. You've got to get in, you've got to ask a lot of questions, got to get to know these folks. And so that discovery of what should we be designing, what should we be building, that's a huge part of this work. And this is where you're asking folks what, maybe watching their workflows, maybe sort of seeing how they do what they do. And you're really here looking for folks also that will be early adopters, maybe folks that might be willing to help you test, because the first official version you release better not be the very first version, right? There better be some test versions that go out, some alphas and betas, and you need to watch some folks use it too. So identifying folks who might help you test is a great way to get them on board with the idea and participating early. Evolution here is kind of obvious, right? You're iterating toward a first official release. You're breaking down your design into components, into smaller reusable pieces. You're building oftentimes a documentation site of some kind where folks can go, a URL they can go to actually see and visit and learn about. You're writing a lot of guidelines at this point. So there's a lot of work to do in the evolution stage here. When we move to stage 2, where it's about growing adoption, the education shifts a little bit, right? We now have an actual system. And so a lot of the education moves, it evolves in a way toward actually showing what you've done, right? And so it's demos. A lot of times we set these up very regularly in our design system work with our clients, where we record these demos. We do them weekly or every other week or whatever the right cadence is, but we find that cadence and we capture these things. And we actually, a lot of times, will put those in as links in a resource section in the documentation site. So people who are new to the system can go back and if they're interested, they can kind of see the history. That history also shows them that there is a long-standing, support for the system, and that gives people confidence in its future. So I think that's a really important aspect of this education work. You want to share some stories, right? How are people who have been using the system, how is that adoption going? And I would encourage you to share some tough ones too, right? Maybe there's a group that tried to adopt and it didn't go that well, but you came alongside them, you supported them, you made a few adjustments, and now they can use the system. That story is a powerful one for people to hear. And it's very encouraging for them to see that your design system approach is supportive of their use of it. Of course, it's a product, so you're going to be thinking about future features. Share that stuff. That's education that's needed. And of course, you're trying to drive adoption. You should have some metrics, some goals around what that looks like, and you need to share those and be able to say we're making progress. Engagement in stage 2 is this is where we're focused on getting folks to participate with us. So people are starting to use it. So let's ask them how that experience is, right? What's working? What's not working? How can it be better? What features do you need, right? Like that roadmap we talked about earlier, that shouldn't just be you and your team putting it together. You need to be drawing on the experience of others. This is where you might literally be sitting with somebody or virtually pairing with somebody who's trying to use your system for the first time. If you are willing to sit with them and help them get it running in their environment, that's going to go a long way toward them, toward you building trust with them. Whatever it takes to support subscribers, think of this like any other product. You have to support the people who use it. And then, asking for folks, especially in leadership, to start to really support, especially if you're a grassroots stage 2 here. This is really where you can start to take something to your leadership and say, hey, here's what we've done. Here's why it's actually worth your investment. We need you to give us time to do this work. And we need you to set aside budget and headcount and all of that, right? So that's part of the job here too. Evolution in stage 2 is a lot of times it's about this sort of idea of growing your documentation around how to actually adopt the system. So getting the system running until your system is easy for somebody who's never used it before to come in on their own, get it running, get using it fairly quickly without you having to hold their hand through that process. You're going to be in stage 2, right? That until you make it easy for them, you're going to be here. You're going to be working with people to adopt. It has to be easy to use, and it has to be valuable for them in whatever their daily tasks are. So making sure there's great docs around that, that you're thinking through the different tooling that's being used. Maybe you need a sketch library, maybe you need Figma, maybe you're using lots of design tools. Maybe you've got folks doing React and Angular, and you need to think through how do we support both, right? So there's lots of evolution here. I will say it's critical that you're being strategic in choosing what features and issues you're adding and fixing, because you're also so focused on supporting the people who are new subscribers. Your time is just going to be limited, and it's oftentimes in stage 2, the teams that are doing this work are very small. So you got to be smart about how you're choosing what work to do. So that's kind of stage 2. Stage 3, when we're into the teenage years here, this is where a lot of times leadership has maybe made an investment, and now they're saying to you, okay, back in stage 1, you told me this was going to make us more efficient. You told me this was going to make our experiences more consistent. You told me this would help us have way fewer accessibility regressions. Well, stage 3 is where they're going to be like, all right, you've got people using it now. Show me the data, prove to me that this investment was worth it. And so this is where you've got to do the capturing and reporting on those metrics. And this is not simple, right? There aren't actually great tools yet for capturing even just something as simple as usage of a component. If you think about this, design systems are intended to be used by lots of disciplines. So everybody from UX and research through to UI design, front-end engineering, back-end engineering, QA, all of it, right? And so to be able to track the use of a component through all of those different tooling kits and all those different processes across all those different teams and different disciplines, that's a very challenging thing. And so you'll have to find ways to sort of do that work inside your organization. But it's really important that you're doing that. And we also see a lot more sophisticated communication happening here. We've got newsletters that are going out. We've got really good release documentation, deprecation documentation, open doors, Slack or whatever channels, you're meeting people where they are, right? You're just going out and participating. You're sharing the things that are happening. And there's a lot more of a refined process here. So what does it look like to use the system? You've got that kind of figured out here. So the documentation gets more sophisticated. It's more clear. And you need to be making sure that you're explaining what your expectations are on their contributions back, right? How do we govern the system? So making sure folks are really aware of all of that is a huge part of the survival here in stage 3. Engagement also becomes way more sophisticated, right? We see things like ambassador programs where you're sending folks from the design system team out to product teams. You might, spend a few weeks on those teams or a few months even just helping them get the system running in their product. You might do the opposite. You might invite a couple folks from one of the product teams or subscriber teams to come and participate on the design system team with you. That's a really good way to get them up to speed very rapidly on what the system is, why it's important, how they can use it. Another cool thing that we're seeing is like when your organization is growing, you're hiring new designers, new developers, new researchers, you may move them on to the design system team first so that they come in gaining an understanding of how you design and build products through the eyes of the system. Then they go out to a product team or a subscriber team, and they go as an ambassador, but also they know how the system works. Huge way to get great adoption and sort of make people a part of the process, you know. Of course, you're accepting contributions, issue report, you know, bug reports, all that, and even code or design contributions. And really, you're engaging with the leadership to make sure they're actually involved in this long term with you. Evolution here, continuing to refine the process around the system, right? Great components, great guidelines, great integrations with lots of frameworks and design tooling, whatever it is that your organization needs. You know, every system's different. So, you know, this presentation is intentionally void of tooling talk because I think we have to understand these concepts independent of the tools, but you do have to, you know, make the system available in the tools that your teams will use. So that integration is a huge part of the evolution work here too. And putting together, you know, a good process for how to keep these things in sync. That's a huge deal. Of course, just continuously iterating and improving everything, right? And then stage 4, the healthy product, evolving a healthy product stage. You know, this is where because you're sort of reaching a sort of a very mature system here, this is where the system actually, the design system team actually has a bigger role than just, you know, maintaining a set of tools. This is where you get to talk about like how the system can actually help the organization evolve in a good way, right? You should be at the table making decisions around process, making decisions around tooling, making decisions around the frameworks and even sometimes, you know, new initiatives inside the organization. This is where you're showing leadership that we actually are making the work product better. It's connecting all the individual metrics to the actual results that the business wants, and being able to talk about those in a really intelligent way. You know, obviously we're continuing to interact with subscribers always, looking for new needs. I think it's interesting in stage 4 systems, they're very actively participating in really big picture conversations. You know, they're actually driving decisions. You know, when we look at the evolution they're doing, they're actually out ahead of the curve of their dev teams. They're looking at the industry and saying, oh man, everybody's using React right now, but we see whatever it is, whatever new framework is coming, we're actually going to do some work. We're going to evolve the system in a way that just shows how we could support whatever that new framework is. And we're actually proactively doing that so that we're not waiting and we're behind when the devs come to us and say, actually, we're going to build this new product using Vue instead of React. And then your system feels out of date and they have a reason to move on without you. Instead, you're proactively doing that work, right? And you're saying, hey, here's how things look, right? We could do it with Vue in this way. We could look at Angular here, whatever it is. And always, you know, like just paying attention to the tooling shifts because it's always different, you know. So again, that's not an all-inclusive list, right? We could spend hours and hours talking about all the different things that are necessary through each stage, but I want you to get a sense for the kinds of activities that are needed. And what's wild about this is that, you know, 2/3 of this work is not designing and coding, right? And I think this is like a mind shift that a lot of folks are just missing. It's political, it's people work, you know, and that's really kind of necessary to do this. Systems only work if the teams will start to trust each other. And that's kind of the work that you have to do, is building that trust. And that doesn't come with just design and development, you know. So it's a lot to tackle. So the last framework I want to share is just around system stability. And in all the conversations that I'm having with internal design system teams, I've kind of identified there's like 3 primary stabilizing forces that we're seeing in the design system work. Those are authority, value, and tradition. So just a quick moment to define each. When I say the authority stabilizing force, I mean that's when leadership is actively supporting the design system team and their goals. And this gives that team a lot of confidence to carry out their work, knowing their leaders have their back. And I say actively here because if you can't actually point to very specific things that your leadership is doing, that means you're probably not actually benefiting from this stabilizing force. So it's not enough for leadership to be aware. That doesn't give you much authority, right? They have to be like making decisions that show support. The kinds of things that you might see in a system that's got this stabilizer are things like actual budgets, right? That's a decision leadership can make. Dedicated time, dedicated staff. And I would say also just encouragement from leadership, not just for others to use the system, but for other parts of the organization to participate in the evolution of the system. That's a huge mindset shift that I think that makes it makes a big impact on the value that authority can bring, the stabilizing force it can bring. When we say the value stabilizing force, I mean that we're talking about how the system can offer like true value to those who use it. And that's not one discipline, that's all disciplines that are involved in product work. So you could say that the people who are using the system are going to choose to do that because it actually helps them with their work in some way. It's going to make things faster or make the output more consistent, or it's going to solve real problems for them instead of creating new ones. The kind of things you might see in a design system that has this stabilizer are things like very rapid adoption, right? Because the system is so valuable, people will want to use it. You're going to see lots of feature requests, lots of bug reports. Subscribers are going to be willing to participate and help evolve the system. If it's actually valuable, they want to see it succeed. So those are kind of indicators that you've got a strong sort of value stabilizer. And the third one, tradition's a little bit different. It means that the system has become the way we build products inside of the organization. What's weird about this is once that system has taken root, there's a lot of stability that comes with it just because it's been accepted. It is kind of a thing that is in practice, the way that we do the work. You might hear folks say something like, our design system is the single source of truth for our design and development practices. And that's a sign maybe that you've got the tradition stabilizer. Of course, when you start, you're not going to have this, right? So I like to think about authority and value and time are the sort of 3 ingredients that you need. So you have authority and you have a value and you do that over a certain period of time. And that's how you earn tradition. And, I think it's important to think about these things because these sort of offer us like 3 legs of a tripod, right? You can imagine if you've just got a single leg, that thing can fall over in any direction, right? A little gust comes along and it's on the ground. But if you've got a couple of these things, you're at least protected from falling in a certain direction, right? And then if you have all 3, which is really the goal, right? That system is very stable, right? No matter what changes are happening around you, you've got a system that will last through those changes. And that's really what's important. This work takes a lot of time and it's a big investment. So if you can't make it stable, it's going to feel like a waste of time and effort when it falls over. And I will say you can't assume that these are good for you. You have to maintain them, right? So once you've gained it, it doesn't just mean it's always there. And, that's tough. That means you can never really let up. And you can imagine if you have all 3 of these, but maybe you slow down on the evolution, right? Or you stop engaging with your subscribers in some way, you could easily lose that value stabilizer. And that puts you in this kind of weird place where you only have authority and tradition, but you're not offering much value to the end users. And that's risky, That's going to make those individuals feel like they don't have a choice but to do the work. Their leadership is telling them to do it. It's just the way we work, but it doesn't actually help them. So that's a bad spot to be. Another example of that might be if you are avoiding authority, right? And I'll just finish a story that I started at the beginning. If you remember back, I told you about that large retailer and how they sort of like paused all of our design system work almost unannounced, Well, that client for us was Gap, and it was a situation where, I mentioned through the redesign of their product detail page, we really found the beginnings of a system. And so it was very grassroots. It wasn't like leadership was driving that decision. So we worked with their team, the individual contributors that we were working alongside, and we evolved that work into a system. And lots of folks saw value in that. Lots of teams started to use it. But somewhere along the line, right, so much money had been spent on that it crossed some threshold, and some executive or leader somewhere in the org saw that on a spreadsheet and said, wait a second, why are we spending all this money on a thing called a design system? We need to stop that work right now. I have no idea what this is. So we had avoided the conversations with the leadership, and that meant we were kind of in this spot, right, where we had value. People wanted to use it. People were using it. So there was a lot of tradition. There was momentum behind it, but we hadn't taken the step to go to leadership and explain it. So what we had to do, what our counterparts inside the org had to do, is they went back to folks who had used the system over the last year, and they said, hey, remember that work you did with the design system? Could you just give us a quick re-estimation of how much time and effort it would have taken you to do without the system? And we took all that data, they put it all together, and they were able to calculate out that for every dollar they spent on the design system, they were gaining about $3 in productivity, just in really designer and developer productivity, being more efficient. And so that, of course, was an easy sell then, right? And so that allowed us to kind of move into that center where we had some stability. But we had to be intentional about that. And that's, honestly, had our counterparts inside not really been prepared for those conversations, that very easily could have been the end of that system. So, so word of wise, a word of caution, I guess. So this kind of gives us a way to think about, stability in our systems in a way to help them become more sustainable. Okay. So that was a lot, and I apologize for the fire hose nature of all of this, but I really wanted to make sure I was giving you kind of an overview of the sort of major components that we're thinking about. And I will tell you there's a lot more to this. Couple quick examples. These are some things that are in progress. We're thinking and doing some research now on adoption health. I was reading an article the other day from an internal design system team on Medium. It was a great article, but it started off by saying, I'm really excited to announce that we have 95% adoption of our design system. And it just kind of boggles my mind a little bit. A statement like that is so interesting to me, because what does adoption even mean? Think about it like this. There's this sort of horizontal slice of adoption, right? Where maybe a team uses just the color system inside your system. So that's one way to adopt it. Or maybe our entire checkout flow uses the whole system. Or maybe that's sort of like a vertical slice. Or maybe we use an old version of the system, right? That's maybe a way to think about it in terms of slicing through time. Or variation is another one, where we use the system, but we modify the components to meet our specific needs in these ways. Now, I don't know for your organization which of these things are good or bad, but it seems to me that it's not as simple as binary, people are using it or they're not. So I think there's a lot of work to do exploring here about what do we mean when we say somebody uses the system, and how do we measure the health of that adoption. And another area of research we're continuing to pursue is this idea of discipline bias. I've been talking with a lot of folks about, how a system itself is very, very biased by the people who build it, just like every other system, right? And if you think about it, right, if your devs if the system is owned by your development team, it's going to serve devs really well, right? It's probably going to live in code. It might even be like a set of React components or something, but that's kind of a way that's biased towards devs and kind of ignoring the needs of designers. And I think the same is true. A lot of folks are just doing all their design system work in Figma or some static design tool now, and that's great. Those are excellent tools, but the devs need to be able to feel that this is valuable for them too, right? And this goes way beyond designers and developers, right? It's about all the disciplines that are needed. And what we see every year in our survey is that the most successful systems are the ones that have lots of engagement from people across the organization with lots of different experience and expertise. And so that cross-discipline approach is really necessary to do this. So I think there's a lot of exploration to do around how to take a system that maybe was originated by a design team or a dev team or something else and evolve it in a way that that removes some of that bias by the discipline. There's a lot more, but I want us to have some time for questions and stuff. So just a few resources to kind of close this out. I mentioned the survey. We've released our 4th year of that data now, and you can use this URL to get that. And I'll ask someone from the team maybe just to put these links into the chat so you have access to them. So don't feel like you have to scribble this down. But this link will take you to the results of the 2021 survey. A lot of interesting information there. And we're always excited to hear if folks find that valuable. So throw it back to us if you've got questions or if you make an observation that we missed or something. Another resource that you might find helpful, I think a lot of times we're so focused on moving the system forward that we miss out on some of the other parts of doing this work. So if you manage a design system or if you find yourself working on one, we made this little calendar for you. It's a very simple calendar subscription. You can throw it into your Google Cal or whatever, subscribe to it with your calendar of choice. And it's just gonna, like, roughly once a week or so, put a little event all day on a Monday or somewhere in there, and it'll just give you some content right in your calendar. When you're thinking about the day, it'll challenge you to think maybe about something a little different for your system. So maybe, hey, why don't you go interview a couple subscribers today, or put that on your calendar, put that on your schedule. A lot of times it's like a mini post right in the description of that event, and it'll link out to other resources. And we try to keep a pulse on other things that are happening around systems too. So, when the Clarity Conference tickets go on sale, we're going to add that to there so and it'll pop up on your calendar, remind you to go grab those, whatever it might be. So this URL will get you to that. I mentioned earlier that I would share with you a resource around the selling side of this. It's a big part of the work. And so I tried to take a lot of the things that have worked for me, because in my role, at least, working with clients, it's more about helping them understand the value. And so I have had a lot of opportunity to speak with executives inside companies just to bring them along, for the design system ride. And so I tried to encapsulate a lot of that down into one article. So this URL will get you out to that article on a list apart where you can read a little bit about some of the things that have worked well for us. And I really want to, if you do one thing after today's event, I think this is probably the most valuable thing. I would love for you to follow this little link out. We spent a bunch of time crafting this maturity assessment, and it's a very simple form survey that you can fill out just using Typeform. And it asks you a handful of questions. I think it's like 6 or 8 questions. And we kind of use that as like a decision tree to help you identify where you are with your system. And the end result of that is some really helpful, very customized information that gets sent to you. I would love your feedback on this. If you have time to do it, it literally will take you 5 or 10 minutes to fill it out, and you'll get an email right away with all that content. So I think we've had a lot of great feedback. People are finding a lot of value in this. So take some time to do that. I think it could be helpful for you. So to take a moment to do that. And of course, this stuff is always changing. It's always growing. It's always iterating. So if you have any feedback from me, please take some time to do that. Again, my email is just ben@heysparkbox.com. And I hope that none of this happens. This is not a result of any individual, right? We've been working really hard. My whole team has been working hard on this. So I could not have done any of this stuff. All of the stuff that I get the privilege to talk to you about is a result of a lot of hard work by a lot of people. I'm really proud to work with those folks. You can see all of their smiling faces on sparkbox.com. So go take a look and say hi to them as well. And of course, email me questions, ideas, feedback. I would love to spend some time chatting with you.